94 pounds. That's what the scale read when they weighed him at Camp McCain, Mississippi, January 1945. Lucas Weber, 17 years old, German prisoner of war. So thin his ribs showed through the Wehrmacht jacket 2 sizes too large for his frame. The sleeves hung past his wrists like a child wearing his father's coat. His boots were cracked American hand-me-downs that rubbed blisters into his heels with every step. He wasn't crying because Germany had lost the war. He was crying because in 6 months America had fed him back to life. And now in August 1945 he had to leave her. Her name was Eleanor Bergstrom. Everyone called her Ellie. She had blonde hair that caught the Minnesota sunlight like spun gold and blue eyes that looked right through a man's soul. She was 19 years old, and she'd taught him that hope could survive even in the ruins of everything he'd ever known. And he was about to lose her forever. But that came later. This story begins in winter, when the world was still burning, and Lucas Weber was just trying to stay alive. December 1944. The Siegfried Line, Western Germany. Lucas stood in a frozen trench with a carabiner 98K rifle in his hands and terror in his chest. He'd been conscripted into the Hitler Youth 3 months earlier, handed this weapon, given 2 weeks of training, and sent to the front. He was 16 years old. The rifle felt like it weighed more than he did. The American artillery had been pounding their position for 6 hours. The sound was beyond noise. It was a physical thing that crushed the air from your lungs and turned your thoughts to static. Men older than his father were crying in the mud beside him. Officers who'd fought in Poland and France and Russia were screaming orders that no one could hear over the endless thunder of the shells. When the Americans came through the smoke, Lucas didn't fire a single shot. He dropped the rifle, raised his hands, walked forward on legs that barely held him upright. A GI, maybe 22 years old, with a face covered in stubble and exhaustion, stared at him. Then did something Lucas would never forget. The American reached into his jacket and pulled out a Hershey's chocolate bar, snapped it in half, handed one piece to Lucas. "Jesus Christ, kid," the GI said in English. Lucas didn't understand yet. "You're just a kid." 3 weeks later, Lucas was on a Liberty ship crossing the Atlantic, seasick, terrified, heading toward a country he'd been taught his entire life to fear. The propaganda had told him Americans were monsters who would torture prisoners who hated Germans with a violence beyond reason. But that GI had given him chocolate and called him kid, and Lucas couldn't make the two realities fit together in his mind. The ship docked in New York Harbor on January 8, 1945. Lucas saw the Statue of Liberty through the fog and snow and felt nothing. He was too hungry, too tired, too broken to feel anything at all. Camp McCain, Mississippi. Processing. They stripped him, weighed him, photographed him. The scale read 94 pounds. The medic, a man with kind eyes and rough hands, wrote something on a clipboard and shook his head. "Malnourished," the medic said to someone Lucas couldn't see. "Severely. How old is he?" 17, came the reply. "Christ, get him to the mess hall. Double rations." Lucas ate that night until his stomach cramped. Bread, soup, more bread, an apple, another apple. His body didn't know what to do with the sudden abundance. He was sick for 2 days, but they kept feeding him, and slowly, impossibly, he started to believe he might survive this. February 1945, Minnesota. The truck rattled through snow-covered farmland under a sky so pale it hurt to look at. Lucas sat in the back with 11 other German POWs, all of them silent, all of them staring at a landscape that looked nothing like home. The land here stretched flat and endless white fields meeting white sky at a horizon you could never reach. No mountains, no forests, just space. Terrible infinite space. The emergency farm labor program. That's what they called it. America needed hands to work the land while its own men were overseas fighting. German prisoners of war would do. They'd be paid 80 cents a day. They'd sleep in barns or converted chicken coops. They'd work hard, keep quiet, and stay grateful. The truck stopped in front of a farmhouse. 2 stories, white paint peeling in places, blue shutters that had faded to grey in the winter light. A red barn stood beside it, solid and practical. 300 acres of frozen earth waiting for spring. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 56, 57 years old. His face was carved from Norwegian granite and prairie wind. He wore work clothes and boots, and a look that said he'd seen too much of the world to be surprised by any of it. "Silas Bergstrom," the guard said, reading from a paper. "You're getting this one. Lucas Weber, 17, no trouble so far. Can fix machines, apparently." Silas looked at Lucas the way a man looks at a horse he's thinking of buying. Assessing, weighing value. Then he nodded once. "Can you work?" Silas asked. Lucas understood the question in the tone, if not the words. He nodded. "Good. Grab your things." Lucas had no things, just the clothes he wore and a blanket they'd given him at the camp. He climbed down from the truck and followed Silas toward the barn. His legs shook from the cold and from fear he couldn't name. That's when he saw her. She stood on the porch where Silas had been moments before, blonde hair pinned back under a cotton scarf, a blue dress visible beneath a heavy coat, and eyes. God, those eyes. Blue like winter ice, looking at him with something that made his chest tighten. Not curiosity, not fear. Hatred. Pure, cold, absolute hatred. She stared at him for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then she turned and went back inside. The door closed with a sound like a rifle shot. Silas saw it, said nothing, just kept walking toward the barn. Inside the barn smelled like hay and diesel and old wood. It was warmer than outside, but not by much. Silas pointed to a corner where straw had been piled thick and a wool blanket lay folded. "You sleep here," Silas said, slowly pointing. "Work starts at dawn. I'll show you what to do. Don't go near the house unless I say. Don't talk to my daughter. Understand?" Lucas nodded. He understood enough. Silas turned to leave, then stopped. His voice was quieter when he spoke again, almost gentle. "Her brother died in June. Normandy. She's not herself. Give her time." Then he was gone. And Lucas was alone in the barn with the smell of animals and the weight of a dead man's ghost pressing down on everything. That night, Lucas lay in the straw and thought about the girl's eyes, about the hatred he'd seen there. And he understood it perfectly, because he'd seen the same look on his own face in the mirror after his brother Franz died at Leningrad. War didn't just kill the people who fought it. It killed pieces of everyone left behind. The work started before sunrise. Silas woke him with a knock on the barn door and handed him a pitchfork. Together, they mucked out the cow stalls in silence. The physical labor felt good after months of sitting in camps and ships. Lucas's muscles remembered this kind of work from the farm where he'd grown up in Bavaria before the world ended. Silas watched him work, said nothing. But Lucas could feel the assessment happening. This was a test. At noon, footsteps on gravel. Lucas looked up from the fence he was mending and saw her walking toward them. Ellie. She carried a tin pail in both hands, moving carefully across the frozen ground. She set the pail down 10 feet from where Lucas stood, didn't look at him, didn't speak. Just set it down, turned around, and walked back to the house. Silas nodded toward the pail. Lunch. Inside were 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a jar of milk still cold enough to hurt his teeth. Lucas ate sitting on the frozen ground, watching Ellie's shape disappear into the house. The food tasted better than anything he'd eaten in years, but it sat heavy in his stomach because he could feel her contempt like a physical weight. This became the pattern. Every day. For weeks. Lucas worked from dawn until the light failed, fixing fences, cleaning equipment, hauling feed, learning the rhythm of this place, the routine that kept a farm alive through a Minnesota winter. And every day at noon, Ellie brought lunch, set it down, left without a word. March came. The snow started to melt. Mud appeared where ice had been, and the world began to thaw. Lucas's English improved in fragments. "Thank you. Good morning." "Yes, sir." Silas didn't talk much, but when he did, He spoke slowly enough that Lucas could catch the meaning. The old man's patience was quiet and solid, like everything else about him. One afternoon, Silas was working on the John Deere Model A tractor, cursing under his breath. The carburetor was acting up, and nothing he tried would fix it. Lucas watched for a few minutes, then stepped forward. "May I?" he asked in broken English, pointing at the engine. Silas stepped back, gestured. "Go ahead." Lucas's hands moved with certainty, his words lacked. He'd grown up around machines. His father had been a mechanic before the war, and some knowledge lives in the fingers rather than the mind. 10 minutes later, the tractor hummed to life, smooth and steady. Silas looked at him differently after that. Not friendly exactly, but something had shifted. Respect, maybe. Recognition that Lucas was more than just a pair of hands. "You're good with your hands," Silas said that evening as they put tools away. "Your father teach you?" "Yes," Lucas said. Then, with effort, "He fixed cars in Bavaria, before war." "He's still alive?" Lucas didn't know. He shook his head. "I don't know." Silas nodded, asked nothing more. That was his way. He never pushed. April arrived. The fields exploded green. Work became harder, longer. Ploughing, planting. 12-hour days under a sun that turned the sky pale and endless. Lucas grew stronger. His English improved. The 94 pounds became 110, then 120. His face filled out. The hollow look in his eyes started to fade. And still, every day at noon, Ellie brought lunch. But something changed in April. Small things. Tiny shifts that meant everything. She started to linger. Just for a moment. Just a few seconds longer than necessary. She'd set down the pail and stand there, not looking at him, but not leaving either. Like she was working up the courage for something she couldn't quite name. One day she spoke. "Where are you from?" 3 words. Quiet. Almost angry, like the question had been dragged out of her against her will. Lucas looked up from his sandwich, startled. It was the first time she'd addressed him directly in 2 months. "Bavaria," he said carefully. "South Germany. Mountains." She nodded, said nothing else, turned and walked away. But the next day she asked another question. "Do you have family?" "Mother," Lucas said. "I think. I don't know if she's alive. Brother died 2 years ago. Leningrad." Something flickered across Ellie's face. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who understood that particular kind of loss. "My brother," she said. "Carl. He was 23, Normandy, June 6th. "I'm sorry," Lucas said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Ellie looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes weren't full of hatred anymore. Now they held something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Or confusion. The slow, painful realization that the enemy standing in front of her was just a boy who'd also lost a brother, who also didn't know if his mother was alive. She left without another word. But something had broken open between them. Some wall had developed a crack. May turned to June. The conversations grew longer. Ellie started sitting on the tailgate of the truck while Lucas ate. She asked about Bavaria, about what he remembered from before the war. He told her about mountains he hadn't seen in 3 years, about a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. She told him about Carl, about how he'd wanted to be a teacher, about the horse he'd raised from a foal, how he'd taught her to ride when she was 6, about the letters he'd sent from basic training full of jokes and reassurances that everything would be fine. About the telegram that came in July, 3 weeks after he died. Lucas listened without judgment, without pity. He just listened. And for the first time since Carl's death, Ellie felt like someone understood. Not just the grief, but the anger, the unfairness, the way the world kept turning when it should have stopped. They didn't talk about the war itself. They didn't talk about right or wrong, about who started what or why. They just talked about the people they'd lost and the holes those people left behind. By July, something unspoken had formed between them, a gravity neither acknowledged aloud. When Lucas worked near the house, Ellie found reasons to be outside, hanging laundry, feeding chickens, sweeping the porch. Their eyes met across distances too far for words, and in those glances a language formed, one built on longing and impossibility and the strange mercy of wartime. Silas noticed. Of course he noticed. The old man saw everything. One evening after supper, he pulled Lucas aside near the barn. The sun hung low and golden above the fields, painting everything in amber light. Silas's face was stern, carved from all those years of hard work and harder choices. "You're a good worker," Silas said. "Fair, honest. I got no complaints about your labor." He paused. The silence stretched. "But she's my daughter. You understand?" Lucas understood. He understood he was a prisoner, an enemy, a boy with no future. He had no right to look at Ellie the way he did, no right to feel what he felt. He nodded. "I understand." "Good," Silas said, but his eyes weren't angry, just sad. "I can see you're not a bad kid. You got dealt a bad hand. But this, whatever this is, it can't go anywhere. The war did what it did. People here, they lost sons and brothers same as her. They won't forgive. They won't forget. If you care about her at all, you'll remember that." "I remember," Lucas said quietly. But remembering and stopping were two different things. July became August. The corn grew tall, swaying in wind that smelled like rain and harvest. News came through the radio in the farmhouse, crackling reports that filtered out to the barn where Lucas slept. The war in Europe was over, but the Pacific still burned. Then came names that changed everything. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over, completely, finally, forever. The announcement that came 3 days later changed Lucas's world. All prisoners of war would be repatriated, sent home to whatever remained of their countries. Processing would begin immediately. Departure within 60 days. Lucas stood in the barn when he heard the news, holding a wrench in one hand, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Home. The word felt hollow, empty. There was nothing waiting for him in Germany. No family he knew of, no farm, no future. Just rubble and ration cards and the shame of a lost war. But Ellie was here, and he was about to lose her. He told Silas that evening while they were putting tools away. The old man nodded like he'd expected it. "When?" Silas asked. "They say maybe 4 weeks, maybe 6. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'll tell Ellie." "Please," Lucas said. "Let me." Silas looked at him, nodded once. "Tomorrow then, after lunch." But Lucas didn't wait until after lunch. That night he heard footsteps on gravel, soft, careful. He looked up from where he sat in the straw and saw Ellie standing in the barn doorway, backlit by moonlight. "My father told me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "You're leaving?" "Yes." "When?" 4 weeks. Maybe less. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. In the dim light from the single lantern, her face looked younger, more vulnerable, less like the angry girl who'd glared at him that first day in February. "I don't want you to go," she said. Simple, direct, the truth stripped bare. "I don't want to go." "Then don't. I have no choice. I'm a prisoner. They're sending us back. There has to be a way. There has to be." "There isn't." Lucas stood, stepped toward her. They were 3 feet apart, close enough to touch, far enough to maintain the fiction that this was still proper. "Ellie, I'm German. I'm the enemy. Your brother died because of people like me. Even if they let me stay, even if there was a way your father is right, this town would never accept it. They'd make your life hell. I won't do that to you. I don't care what they think." "You should." You have to live here. I don't." Tears ran down her face now. She didn't try to hide them. "This isn't fair." "No," Lucas agreed. "It's not." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out to him. Her hand trembled. "My address," she said. "Write to me, if you can, please." Lucas took the paper, unfolded it, saw her handwriting careful and neat. Below the address, a single sentence in English. "Write to me if you can." He looked at her, really looked, memorizing the way the lamplight caught in her hair, the exact shade of blue in her eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow from falling off Carl's horse when she was 9. Every detail, every piece of her. "I promise," he said. "I'll write. And I'll find a way back. Somehow. I don't know how, but I promise I'll try." She stepped forward, put her arms around him, held on like she was trying to press the memory of him into her bones. Lucas held her back, feeling her heart beat against his chest, breathing in the smell of soap and summer air in her hair. They stood like that for a long time, not kissing, not speaking, just holding each other in the quiet barn while the world spun on toward whatever came next. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were red but dry. She'd used up all her tears. "Don't forget me," she whispered. "Never," Lucas said. "Not if I live 1,000 years." She left without looking back. The door closed. Lucas stood alone in the barn, holding the piece of paper like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Because it was. The next 4 weeks passed like water through his fingers. Too fast. Never fast enough. Every moment with Ellie felt stolen and precious. They didn't speak about his leaving again. They just existed together in the time they had left, working side by side in the fields, eating lunch on the truck tailgate, sitting on the porch in the evening while Silas pretended not to notice. On the last Sunday before Lucas had to report to the processing camp, Silas did something unexpected. He invited Lucas to have dinner in the house. Not in the barn, not outside. At the table. Like a person. Like family. It was Silas's birthday. July 30th. He was 56 years old. Ellie cooked. Fried chicken. Mashed potatoes. Gravy. Green beans from the garden. Corn on the cob. And for breakfast the next morning, because Silas insisted Lucas stay until dawn, bacon. The bacon scene that would haunt Lucas for the rest of his life. Ellie cooked it in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her grandmother. 6 thick strips, edges curling crisp and dark, the center still soft enough to bend. The smell filled the entire kitchen. Salt and smoke and something almost sweet, the pork fat caramelizing in its own heat. The sound was what Lucas remembered most. The sizzle and pop as Ellie turned each piece with a fork, the way the grease sang against the black iron. She put 3 pieces on his plate, then 3 more. Lucas cut into the first piece. The knife went through with almost no resistance, crispy on the outside, tender within. He put it in his mouth and closed his eyes. Salt hit first. Not harsh, but deep and satisfying, the kind of salt that made your mouth water for more. Then the fat melting across his tongue like warm silk coating his throat. And underneath it all, a sweetness he hadn't expected. Not sugar sweet, but the natural sweetness of pork, cooked low and slow until everything concentrated and intensified. He ate all 6 pieces, slowly, savoring every bite. The texture, the flavor, the simple, impossible abundance of it. For those few minutes he forgot about the war, forgot about being a prisoner, forgot about leaving. There was only bacon and the warmth of the kitchen, and Ellie watching him with soft eyes from across the table. When he finished, Silas poured him coffee. Real coffee, not the ersatz garbage made from acorns that Lucas remembered from Germany. The richness of it, the bitter-smooth comfort, felt like a miracle. "Thank you," Lucas said. The words weren't enough, but they were all he had. Silas nodded. "You're welcome at this table, son." That night, back in the barn, Lucas couldn't sleep. He lay in the straw and thought about the bacon, about how it had tasted, about the abundance represented in those 6 strips of meat. And then he thought about his mother. Winter, 1943, Bavaria. The coldest January in a generation. Lucas's mother, Anna Weber, boiling oak bark in a pot because there was nothing else. Eating it like soup because the alternative was not eating at all. Her hands shaking from hunger and cold. Her face gaunt, hollowed out by 2 years of war and rationing. His brother Franz was already dead by then, frozen to death in the siege of Leningrad. And here Lucas was eating 6 pieces of bacon like it was nothing, drinking real coffee, getting fat on American food while his mother, if she was even still alive, was probably eating bark and grass and whatever else she could find to keep her body working. The guilt crashed over him like a wave. Survivor's guilt, they'd call it later. But that night, it just felt like betrayal. Like he'd abandoned everyone who'd ever mattered to him to come here and eat bacon and fall in love with a girl whose brother had died fighting people like him. He pressed his face into the straw and cried. Silent, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. Shame and relief and gratitude and hatred all mixed together until he couldn't tell which was which. Ellie saw the light in the barn at 2 in the morning. She was awake too, staring at her ceiling, counting down the hours until he left. She saw the lantern glow through the window and knew. She didn't go to him. Some pain was too private to intrude on. But she stood at her window and watched that light, and understood in a way she couldn't explain exactly what he was feeling. September 12th, 1945. The day Lucas left. The truck came at dawn. Silas and Ellie stood in the yard while Lucas climbed into the back with 8 other POWs from nearby farms. He had one bag. Inside it were 2 shirts, a pair of trousers, a Bible someone had given him, and every letter Ellie had slipped to him over the past 4 weeks. Not love letters exactly, just notes. Small things. Reminders that he mattered to someone. He looked at her as the truck started to move. She stood next to her father, straight-backed and dry-eyed. She didn't wave, didn't cry, just looked at him with those blue eyes that had seen him as an enemy, then a person, then something more. Lucas pressed his hand against the piece of paper in his shirt pocket. Her address, her promise to write, his promise to return. The truck pulled away. The farm grew smaller. Ellie's shape blurred into the distance, and Lucas Weber, 17 years old, 122 pounds, no longer a skeleton, but still so very young, felt his heart break clean in two. He was going home to a country that wasn't home anymore, leaving behind the only place where he'd ever felt like he belonged. The truck turned onto the main road. The farm disappeared, and all Lucas had left was a piece of paper and a promise he had no idea how to keep. But he would keep it, somehow, even if it took years. Even if it killed him. He would find his way back to her. The ship left New York Harbor on September the 22nd, 1945. A converted troop carrier packed with 2,000 German prisoners, all of them silent, all of them staring at the water like it held answers to questions they couldn't voice. Lucas stood on deck as the Statue of Liberty disappeared into the fog. His hand went to his shirt pocket, checking for the 100th time that the paper was still there. Ellie's address. The only thing that mattered. Around him, men smoked cigarettes down to the filters. Some cried, most just stared. They were going home, but home meant different things to different people. For some it meant family waiting, for others it meant graves to visit. For Lucas, it meant nothing at all. A man beside him, maybe 40 years old with grey in his beard, spat over the railing. "What are you going back to?" the man asked in German. The first words anyone had spoken to Lucas in hours. "I don't know," Lucas said honestly. "Maybe nothing." The man nodded. "Me too. Wife wrote 6 months ago. Said the apartment was bombed. Haven't heard from her since." He lit another cigarette with shaking hands. "But what choice do we have?" "None," Lucas thought. They had no choice at all. The Atlantic crossing took 11 days. Cold, grey, endless. The ship rolled through storms that turned the hold into a vomit-stinking nightmare. Men who'd survived years of war got seasick like children. Lucas spent most of the voyage on deck, preferring the freezing wind to the misery below. He thought about Ellie constantly, wondered what she was doing, if she thought about him, if she'd already started to forget. On October 3rd, 1945, the ship docked at Bremerhaven. The port was a graveyard. Twisted metal, burned-out buildings, cranes that would never move again frozen in their final positions like the skeletons of prehistoric animals. The smell hit Lucas before he even stepped off the gangplank. Ash and rot and human waste and something else. Despair, maybe. The smell of a country that had lost everything. They were processed quickly. Names checked against lists. Discharge papers handed out. 10 Reichsmarks pressed into each man's hand. Enough for maybe 2 meals if you could find someone selling food. "Where are you headed?" an American officer asked Lucas in broken German. "Bavaria, Garmisch." The officer's face showed something that might have been pity. "Long walk. Good luck, kid." Lucas started walking south that afternoon. He had no other plan, no money for a train even if the trains were running, just his feet and the vague direction of home. The journey took 3 weeks. He hitched rides on American military trucks when he could, walked when he couldn't, when he slept in ditches and abandoned buildings, ate whatever people would spare, a piece of bread here, watery soup there. The landscape he passed through looked like the surface of the moon, cities reduced to rubble, forests stripped for firewood, fields cratered and barren, children with hollow eyes begged at every crossroads, old women picked through debris looking for anything salvageable. Bodies still lay in some of the ruins covered with sheets or coats, waiting for someone with enough strength to bury them. This was the fatherland. This was what they'd fought for. This was victory's opposite, its complete annihilation. Lucas reached Garmisch on October 24th. The town he'd grown up in existed mostly in memory now. Half the buildings were gone. The rest stood like broken-teeth walls, missing roofs, caved-in windows, empty and dark. He walked to his street, to where his street had been. His hands started shaking before he even turned the corner because some part of him already knew. The house was gone. Not damaged, not burned. Gone. A bomb crater maybe 20 feet across marked where it had stood. Grass had started to grow at the edges. Rain had filled the bottom with black water that reflected nothing. Lucas stood at the edge of the crater and felt his legs give out. He sat down hard on the broken pavement. A voice behind him. "You're Anna's boy." He turned. An old woman, maybe 70, her back bent from years of work. Frau Hoffmann. She'd lived 3 doors down his entire life. "Yes," Lucas managed. "Where is she? Where's my mother?" Frau Hoffmann's face told him before her words did. "Oh, child, you don't know. She died March of 44. Air raid. The whole street. 12 people. We buried her in the cemetery at St. Martin's. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." March 1944. Lucas did the math in his head. He'd been captured in December 1944. By February 1945, he was eating bacon in Minnesota. His mother had been dead nearly 2 years before he even set foot in America. She'd died while he was still in Germany, while he was being trained to shoot a rifle he'd never fire. She'd died, and he hadn't known, hadn't felt it, hadn't been there. "Thank you," Lucas said. The words came from somewhere far away. "Thank you for telling me." He found the grave that afternoon, St. Martin's Cemetery on the hill above town. A simple wooden cross with her name carved into it. Anna Weber, 1901 to 1944. No other words, no poetry, just a name and dates that held an entire life. Lucas knelt in the mud beside the grave. The guilt from that bacon breakfast in Minnesota came roaring back 100 times stronger. His mother had died eating bark and potato peels while he was in a warm barn in America getting fat on bread and milk and kindness. Franz was dead. His mother was dead. His father had disappeared in Russia 3 years ago and was certainly dead. Lucas had no siblings, no cousins, no aunts or uncles that he knew of. He was completely alone in the world, except for a piece of paper in his pocket with an address in Minnesota. He stayed at the grave until dark, then walked back into town and found a displaced persons camp set up in what had been a school. 200 people living in classrooms, sleeping on floors, eating whatever the Allies provided. Lucas showed his discharge papers, and they let him in. He lived there for 6 weeks, worked moving supplies for British occupation forces in exchange for food and a place to sleep. The work was mindless, exhausting, exactly what he needed. His body moved. His mind stayed carefully blank. At night, he'd take out the paper with Ellie's address, smooth it flat on his knee, read it by candlelight. Write to me if you can. December 1945. Lucas found a pencil and a scrap of paper at the DP camp, sat down at a table in the corner of the mess hall and stared at the blank page for an hour. What could he possibly say? How could he explain what he'd found here? How could he tell her that everyone he'd ever loved was dead, and she was the only thing keeping him from walking into the next bomb crater and not coming out? He wrote it anyway, in careful, broken English. Dear Ellie, I am back in Germany safe. I find my mother is dead. Died March 1944 in air raid. House is gone. Everything gone. I have no family now. I think of you every day. Only thing that make me want to keep living. I work here in camp. I try to save money. I don't know if I can come back to America, but I try. I promise I try. Please write if you can. Please tell me you are well. Yours, Lucas. He read it over 3 times. It said nothing of what he really felt. How could words on paper carry the weight of what he needed to say? But it was all he had. He found a Red Cross worker the next day, a British woman in her 50s who looked at him with tired kindness. I need to send letter to America, Lucas said in his best English. Can you help? She took the letter, looked at the address, looked at him. POW? Was, yes. She nodded. I'll do my best. No promises. Mail service is chaos right now. But I'll try. Thank you. The letter went into a canvas bag with 100 others. Lucas watched it disappear and felt like he'd just thrown his heart into the ocean. 3 months passed. January, February, March of 1946. Winter in Germany was hunger and cold and the slow, grinding misery of trying to survive in a country that had nothing left. Lucas worked, saved his pfennigs, slept on a floor in a building with no heat, lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. No letter came back. Maybe she never got it. Maybe she'd decided to forget him. Maybe she'd met someone else, someone who wasn't an enemy, who could give her a life that made sense. Lucas couldn't blame her if she had. He had nothing to offer. He was nothing. April 3rd, 1946. A Red Cross worker found him loading trucks. Weber, Lucas Weber. Yes. She held out an envelope, thin, creased, covered in stamps and routing marks, but there, real, existing in the world. Lucas took it with shaking hands. The return address was written in handwriting he recognized from the paper he carried everywhere. Eleanor Bergstrom, Redwood County, Minnesota, USA. He didn't open it there. Couldn't. He finished his shift, first hands moving automatically while his mind screamed. Then walked to a quiet corner of the camp, sat down with his back against a wall, and opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long. Her handwriting was careful, clear, obviously written and rewritten, until every word was right. Dear Lucas, your letter reached me February 18th. I cried when I read it. I'm so sorry about your mother. I'm sorry about everything you've lost. No one should have to carry that much grief alone. I want you to know something. I haven't forgotten you. I won't forget you. Every day at noon I still walk out to the south field where we used to eat lunch and I think about you. Papa sees me doing it, but he doesn't say anything. Things here are the same. The farm keeps going because farms always do. We planted winter wheat. The cows are healthy. The John Deere you fixed is still running perfectly. I think about you every single day. I pray you're safe. I pray you're eating enough. I pray you haven't given up. Please don't give up. Write to me again. Tell me everything, even the hard things, especially the hard things. I want to know. Yours always, Ellie. Lucas read the letter 5 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket next to the paper with her address. The 2 pieces of paper together weighed almost nothing, but they felt like the only solid things in his entire world. He wrote back that night. The letters became a rhythm, once a month, sometimes twice, if the mail gods smiled. Lucas wrote about his job in a machine shop in Munich that he'd found in May, about learning to weld, about saving every pfennig he earned, about the slow grinding work of rebuilding a life from absolute zero. He didn't write about the hunger that never quite went away, or the nightmares where he was back in the trench with the rifle, or the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. He wrote about hope instead, about the future, about someday. Ellie wrote about the farm, about the seasons changing, about a new calf born in April, about books she was reading, about her father who'd stopped asking questions about the letters she received and the ones she sent. Her letters grew longer through the summer of 1946, more personal. She told him things she said she'd never told anyone, about how angry she was at Carl for dying, how guilty that anger made her feel, about dreams where he was still alive, and the crushing disappointment of waking up, about feeling trapped in a town where everyone knew her as Carl's sister, the girl whose brother was a hero, and never seeing her as herself, about how talking to Lucas even through letters across an ocean made her feel less alone than she'd felt since Carl died. Lucas told her about his childhood, about learning to fix engines with his father, about Franz teaching him to fish in mountain streams, about his mother's cooking the smell of bread baking on Sunday mornings before the war, about the person he'd been before the uniform before the war turned him into something he didn't recognize. They didn't talk about love. Not directly, but it saturated every word, every carefully chosen phrase, every detail shared. They were rebuilding each other through paper and ink, and the stubborn refusal to let distance mean the end. Fall. 1946 turned to winter. Christmas came and went. The letters kept crossing the Atlantic like birds migrating between 2 worlds. Then, February 1947. Ellie's letter arrived with a tone that made Lucas's stomach clench before he even read the words. There's a man here. His name is Emmett Caldwell. He owns the general store in town. He came back from the Pacific last spring. He's been paying attention to me, taking me to church socials, bringing gifts for Papa. Everyone thinks it's wonderful. Papa likes him. The whole town approves. He hasn't asked me anything yet, but I think he will. And I don't know what to say when he does. You're so far away. I don't know if you'll ever be able to come back. I don't know if I'm being foolish, waiting for something that might never happen. I'm not saying I'll say yes to him. I'm not saying anything. I just thought you should know, because I've never lied to you and I won't start now. Please tell me what to think. Please help me know what to do. Lucas sat in his small rented room in Munich and stared at those words until they blurred. The machine shop where he worked paid barely enough to live on. He'd been saving for nearly 2 years and had maybe a third of what he'd need for passage to America. And that was assuming they'd even let him in, which was far from certain. Emmett Caldwell, a man who'd fought for America, who probably owned his store outright, who could give Ellie a life that made sense, security, respectability, a future that didn't require hoping against hope that immigration laws would change. Lucas should tell her to say yes. He should be selfless and noble and release her from a promise that was destroying her life. He wrote back the next day, "Don't say yes to him because everyone else thinks you should. Don't say yes because it's easier. Don't say yes unless you love him. I have no right to ask you to wait for me. I know that. I have nothing to offer you except promises I don't know how to keep. But I'm trying, Ellie. I'm saving every mark I earn. I'm learning English better. I'm looking into immigration programs. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if they'll ever let me back into America. But I'm trying. If you meet someone who makes you happy, someone who can give you the life you deserve, then I want you to have that. I want you to be happy more than I want anything for myself. But if you're only saying yes because you've given up on me, then please don't. Please give me more time. Please keep believing. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'll say it now. I love you. I've loved you since that first summer when you started sitting with me during lunch. I'll love you until the day I die. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. But please decide for yourself. Not for your father, or the town, or what anyone else thinks. Yours forever. Lucas. He sent the letter and waited. 6 weeks of agony, wondering if he'd said too much or not enough. Wondering if that letter would be the last one. If he'd just lost the only thing that mattered. The reply came in April. I told him no. 3 words in the first sentence. Then 3 more pages explaining. How Emmett had asked her to marry him at the spring social in front of half the town. How she'd asked for time to think. How everyone had assumed that meant yes eventually. How she'd spent a week pretending to consider it before realizing she was only pretending. How she'd told him no as kindly as she could. How he'd taken it like a gentleman even though she could see the hurt. How the town had buzzed with gossip. How her father had said nothing but looked disappointed. I don't care what they think, she wrote. I don't care if they think I'm foolish. I know what I feel. I know what I want. And it's not Emmett Caldwell with his store and his respectability and his sensible future. It's you. It's always been you. I don't know how we make this work, but I believe we will. I have to believe it or I'll go crazy. Keep trying, keep saving, keep believing. I'll do the same. I love you too. I should have said it sooner, but I'm saying it now. Wait for me like I'm waiting for you. Yours, Ellie. Lucas read that letter and cried for the first time since finding his mother's grave. Not sad tears, relief, joy. The overwhelming knowledge that he wasn't alone in this impossible thing. The months that followed were hard in new ways. Emmett Caldwell didn't disappear. He was still there in town, a constant reminder to Ellie of the choice she'd made. People talked, some were kind, others weren't. Her father said less and less at dinner, his silence heavy with opinion he wouldn't voice. But the letters kept coming. Lucas found better work in the summer of 1947, a factory that paid real wages. He saved harder, cut his expenses to nothing, lived on bread and margarine and coffee so weak it was barely brown. Every pfennig went into a tin can hidden under his mattress. In August 1947, he went to the American consulate in Munich, asked about immigration. The clerk looked at him like he'd asked for the moon. Former POW, the clerk asked. Yes, but not happening. Policy's pretty clear. You'd need a sponsor. Family already in the States. Employment waiting. Even then, it's a long shot. What if I have a sponsor? Someone willing to vouch for me? The clerk's expression softened slightly. Then you fill out the forms. Wait. Hope. But I'll be honest with you, son. Don't get your hopes up. They're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat for Germans right now. Lucas took the forms anyway, sent them to Ellie with a carefully worded letter. Would Silas be willing to sponsor him? He hated to ask, had no right to ask. But if there was any chance... Ellie's response came faster than usual, as if she'd been waiting for this question, planning for it. Papa and I talked. Really talked for the first time since you left. I told him everything. How I feel about you. What I want. What I'm hoping for. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said you're a good kid who got dealt a bad hand. He said he watched you work for 6 months and never saw you complain or slack or cause trouble. He said the war made you into a soldier, but it didn't make you into a bad person. Then he asked if I was sure, really sure, because if he does this, if he sponsors you, there's no going back. The town will talk. Some people will be angry. It won't be easy. I told him I've never been more sure of anything. He's contacting a lawyer. We're going to do this. We're going to bring you home. Home. She'd called America home. For him. The paperwork took 18 months. Applications, affidavits, medical exams, background checks, character references. Silas wrote a letter describing Lucas's work ethic and character. The pastor at St. Olaf Lutheran wrote another based entirely on what the Bergstroms had told him, since he'd never actually met Lucas. 3 neighbours who remembered the quiet German boy who'd fixed their fences and never caused trouble added their voices. Every form required fees Lucas barely had. Every step took months. The bureaucracy moved at the speed of continental drift. January 1950. The letter Lucas had been praying for arrived in a brown envelope with an official seal. Approved. Lucas Weber, formerly of Garmisch, Bavaria, Germany, was granted permission to immigrate to the United States under the Displaced Persons Act of 1948. He had 60 days to arrange passage and report to processing. He read the letter 3 times to make sure it was real. Then he sat down on his bed and shook. Just shook. His hands, his shoulders, his whole body trembling with something too big to name. It was happening. It was actually happening. He had $47 in his tin can. The passage from Hamburg to New York cost $80. He'd come up short. He was so close and still not close enough. That night he wrote to Ellie, told her the news about the approval, told her he was short on money but he'd figure it out, maybe work extra shifts, maybe find something to sell. He'd make it work somehow. Her response came with a money order attached. $50. I sold Mama's piano, she wrote, the one she taught me to play on, the one she brought from her mother's house when she married Papa. It was the last thing I had of hers. Don't feel bad about this. Don't feel guilty. I chose this. The piano is just wood and wire. You're real. You're what matters. Buy your ticket. Come home. Lucas held the money order and thought about Ellie giving up the last piece of her mother to bring him across an ocean. The weight of that sacrifice. The impossibility of ever being worthy of it. Silas knew. Ellie told him in a letter that arrived a week later. Her father had found out about the piano, about the money. She'd expected him to be angry. Instead, he'd been quiet for a long time. Then he'd taken out his wallet and put $200 on the kitchen table. For the wedding, he'd said. When he gets here, consider it my contribution. Then he'd walked out to the barn, and Ellie had cried into her hands because her father, her stern, silent Norwegian stone of a father, had just given his blessing. April 20th, 1950. Hamburg Harbour. Lucas stood at the base of a gangplank leading to a passenger liner. Not a troop transport this time. A real ship carrying real passengers to real futures. He had 1 suitcase. Inside 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, the Bible from the DP camp, and every letter Ellie had ever sent him. 43 letters. 4 years of paper and ink and love that had survived when nothing else did. He showed his papers at the checkpoint. The official stamped them without comment, pointed to the ship. Lucas climbed the gangplank, found his berth in 3rd class, put his suitcase on the narrow bed, went up on deck as the ship prepared to leave. Germany slipped away behind him. The country where he'd been born, where everyone he'd ever known was buried, where he had no future, and too many ghosts. Good, he thought. Let it go. Let all of it go. He was sailing toward something instead of away for the first time in his life. The Atlantic crossing took 7 days. Lucas spent most of it on deck watching the horizon, getting closer, mile by mile, day by day. On the morning of May 17th, 1950, New York Harbor emerged from the fog. The Statue of Liberty stood exactly where she'd been 5 years ago, when Lucas had watched her disappear. He'd been a prisoner then, broken, barely alive, convinced the world held nothing but cruelty. Now he was a free man, 23 years old, still too thin, but alive, coming back to the only place that had ever felt like home. The ship docked. Processing took 3 hours. Then he was through, standing on American soil, not as an enemy, not as a prisoner, as a man with a future. He had a train ticket to Minnesota, 3 days across the country, through cities and plains and mountains, through a landscape so vast it made Germany feel like a postage stamp. On May 20th, 1950, The train pulled into Redwood Falls, Minnesota at 4:17 in the afternoon. Lucas stood as the train slowed, grabbed his suitcase, walked to the door. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he could hear it over the sound of the brakes. The train sighed to a stop. The door opened. Lucas stepped onto the platform. For a moment he just stood there, afraid to look. Afraid she wouldn't be there. Afraid this was a dream and he'd wake up back in Munich in his rented room with nothing but letters and hope. Then he looked up, and there, beside a blue Ford pickup with faded paint and rust on the wheel wells, stood Ellie. She was 24 now, 5 years older than the girl who'd brought him lunch in the fields. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a way that showed more of her face. She wore a simple blue dress and worn shoes, and she was the most beautiful thing Lucas had ever seen. She didn't run to him. He didn't run to her. They stood 20 feet apart, looking at each other across a distance that held 5 years, and an ocean, and a war, and everything they'd survived to get to this moment. Then slowly, like sunrise, Ellie smiled, and Lucas felt 5 years collapse into nothing. Every letter, every lonely night, every moment of doubt, all of it folded up and disappeared. He walked toward her. She walked toward him. They met in the middle. "You came," she said. Her voice was exactly how he remembered. "I promised," he said. She reached for his hand. He took it. Her skin was warm, real, here. Behind her, Silas climbed out of the truck. Older now, his hair more grey than brown, his shoulders a little less square, but solid, present. He looked at Lucas and gave him a single nod. Permission. Blessing. Welcome. Lucas nodded back, then looked at Ellie again, at the woman who'd waited 5 years for a promise made in a barn, who'd sold her mother's piano to bring him home, who'd believed when belief made no sense at all. "I'm here," he said. "I'm really here." "Yes," Ellie said. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. "You're home." And for the first time since the war began, Lucas Weber believed it. He was home. The drive from the train station to the Bergstrom farm took 17 minutes. Lucas sat in the passenger seat of the Ford, his suitcase between his feet, his hand resting on the bench seat inches from Ellie's. Not touching. Not yet. Silas drove in silence, his eyes on the road giving them space without making it obvious. The landscape hadn't changed, the same flat fields stretching to the horizon, the same pale sky, the same sense of infinite space that had overwhelmed Lucas the first time he'd seen it in February 1945. But now it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like coming home. They passed farms, Lucas remembered. The Henderson place with its distinctive red silo, the old Peterson homestead where the retired veteran lived. Houses where people had looked at him with suspicion or kindness or simple curiosity when he'd been a prisoner working these fields. What would they think now? Now that he was back, not as a POW but as something else, something undefined, something that would require explanation. The truck turned onto the gravel drive. There it was, the white farmhouse with blue shutters, the red barn, 300 acres of land that had been worked by 3 generations of Bergstroms, the place where Lucas had learned that mercy existed in the world. Silas parked near the barn, turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. "I'll let you two talk," Silas said. He looked at Lucas directly for the first time since the station. "Welcome back, son." Then he climbed out and walked toward the house, leaving them alone. Ellie turned to face Lucas. In the close space of the truck cab, he could see details the distance at the station had hidden. Tiny lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting in the sun. A small scar on her chin he didn't remember. 5 years of living written in subtle changes across her face. "You're really here," she said, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "I'm really here. I thought about this moment so many times. What I'd say, what you'd say, And now I can't remember any of it. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ellie laughed. A real laugh, surprised and relieved and full of joy. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We wrote each other 43 letters. We said everything there was to say. And now I don't know where to start."
"Start anywhere," Lucas said. "We have time."
Time. The word felt like a luxury. For 5 years time had been their enemy, the thing that separated them, the distance they had to endure. Now it was on their side. Ellie reached across the space between them and took his hand, her fingers interlaced with his, warm and solid and real. "Come on," she said. "Let me show you around. Everything's the same but different. Like you." They walked the farm together as the afternoon light turned golden. Ellie pointed out changes. A new chicken coop her father had built, the south field where they'd replanted after a bad season, the fence line Lucas had mended 5 years ago still standing. They ended up in the barn, the same barn where Lucas had slept in the straw, where Ellie had come to him the night before he left, where everything that mattered had started. "I kept your spot the same," Ellie said quietly. "Papa thought I was being foolish, but I couldn't bring myself to change it."
"The blanket you used is still there, folded, waiting."
Lucas looked at the corner. The straw was fresh, but yes, the blanket was there, exactly where he'd left it.
"I didn't know if I'd ever see this place again," he said. "In Germany, when everything was at its worst, I'd close my eyes and remember this barn, the way it smelled, the sound of rain on the roof. It kept me sane."
"You're not sleeping here anymore," Ellie said firmly. "Papa's already preparing the guest room for you. You're not a prisoner. You're not a hired hand. You're—" She stopped. The word hung unspoken between them. "What am I?" Lucas asked gently. "I don't know yet," Ellie admitted. "We have to figure that out. Together." That evening, Silas made dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. Simple food, but abundant. More food than Lucas had seen on one table in 5 years. They ate mostly in silence, the kind that was comfortable rather than awkward. Afterward, Silas poured coffee and looked at Lucas across the table.
"We need to talk about Sunday," Silas said. "Sunday. Church, St. Olaf Lutheran. The whole town will be there. They'll see you with us. Questions will be asked. Some people won't be happy. I need to know you're ready for that."
Lucas thought about Emmett Caldwell, about the veterans who'd lost friends to German bullets, about a town that had watched one of their own come home in a flag-draped coffin. "I understand," Lucas said. "If you'd rather I stayed away—" "No," Silas cut him off. "You're coming, with us, as part of this family. But I won't lie to you. It's going to be hard. Some people will say things, some will turn their backs. You need to be ready." "I'm ready." Silas nodded, looked at Ellie, then back to Lucas. "There's something else you should know," Silas said. He stood, walked to a cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a wooden box. Old, worn. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside was a military medal, tarnished silver. Next to it a photograph, black and white, faded. 2 young men in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. "Argonne Forest, October 1918, Silas said quietly. "I was 30. First time I'd ever left Minnesota. First time I'd seen what war really was." He picked up the photograph, pointed to one of the men. "That's me. And that," he pointed to the other soldier, "is the man who saved my life." Lucas looked closer. The second soldier was German. You could tell by the uniform. "His name was Franz Weber," Silas continued. "From Garmisch, Bavaria. We were both wounded, caught in no man's land between the lines. I was bleeding out. Franz was hit in the leg, probably would have made it back to his lines if he'd tried. But he didn't." Silas sat back down. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he picked up the medal. "He shared his water with me, bandaged my wound with strips from his own uniform, kept me alive for 6 hours until the stretcher bearers found us.
We were separated after that, taken to different field hospitals. I tried to find him after the war. Found out he died in 1920. Wounds got infected, never properly healed. He looked at Lucas directly. Franz Weber, from Garmisch. I'm guessing that name means something to you. Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. His grandfather's name had been Franz Weber, from Garmisch, who'd fought in the First War and died from wounds that wouldn't heal. That was my grandfather, Lucas whispered. I never knew him. He died before I was born. My mother said he was wounded in France, but she never told me details. Small world, Silas said. Or maybe not so small. Maybe this was always supposed to happen. Your grandfather saved my life. Now I'm helping his grandson. Seems fair. He closed the box and pushed it across the table to Lucas.
I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. When people ask why I'm sponsoring you, why I'm letting you court my daughter, this is my answer. Not because the war's over, not because I'm being charitable, but because your family saved mine, and now it's my turn to return the favor. Lucas looked at the photograph, at his grandfather's young face smiling in a war that would eventually kill him. At Silas beside him, both of them too young to know what their future held. He was a good man, Silas said. Franz? In those 6 hours we couldn't really talk, different languages, but I could tell. The way he moved, the way he looked at me. He saw a person, not an enemy. That's rare, especially in war. Thank you, Lucas managed, for telling me, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Silas said. Wait until after Sunday. Sunday came. Lucas wore his only suit. Too thin for Minnesota standards, but clean and pressed. Ellie wore a yellow dress that made her hair shine gold in the morning light. Silas drove them to town in the Ford, his face set in the expression Lucas remembered from 5 years ago. Determined, ready for whatever came. St. Olaf Lutheran Church sat on Main Street, white clapboard with a tall steeple. Cars and trucks filled the parking area. People streamed toward the entrance in their Sunday best. Families, couples, old men and women who'd been coming here for 50 years. The Bergstrom truck pulled up. Silas parked. For a moment, no one moved. Last chance to change your mind, Silas said to Lucas. I'm not changing my mind. Good. Then let's go. They climbed out, walked toward the church. Conversations stopped as people noticed. Heads turned. A woman Lucas didn't recognize actually gasped. Then a man stepped out of the crowd, mid-50s, wearing a suit slightly too tight for his frame. A scar ran along his jaw. His eyes were hard. Emmett Caldwell. Silas, Emmett said. His voice was level, but his jaw was tight. Didn't expect to see you bringing company. Emmett. Silas nodded. This is Lucas Weber. He's staying with us, working the farm. That right? Emmett looked at Lucas like he was examining livestock. Heard you were a POW here during the war. Yes, sir. And now you're back. Interesting timing. The air between them felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Ellie stepped closer to Lucas, not touching, but close enough to make her position clear. We should get inside, Ellie said firmly. Service is starting. They moved to walk past Emmett, but he didn't quite step aside. Folks in this town have long memories, Emmett said quietly. Might want to remember that. I do remember, Lucas said. He met Emmett's eyes directly. I remember men who lost sons and brothers. I remember what the war cost. I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to be worth the second chance I've been given. Something flickered in Emmett's face. Not acceptance, but maybe a grudging acknowledgement. He stepped aside. They made it 3 more steps before another voice stopped them. Silas Bergstrom. An old man. Had to be 75 at least. Thin as wire with eyes that had seen too much. He walked with a cane, but his back was straight. Amos Thornton. Lucas remembered the name from Ellie's letters. Lost his son at the Battle of the Bulge.
December 1944. The same month Lucas had been captured. This was it. This was where everything fell apart. Amos walked right up to them, looked at Lucas for a long, terrible moment. "You, the German boy who worked Silas's farm in 45? "Yes, sir." "How old are you, son?" 23. Amos nodded slowly. "My boy David was 19 when he died. Froze to death in a foxhole in Belgium. Took 3 days for them to recover his body." Lucas said nothing. What could he say? "I hated Germans for a long time after that," Amos continued. "Hated every single one of you. Thought if I ever met one face to face, I'd kill him with my bare hands." People had stopped moving. Everyone was watching now, the entire congregation frozen in the moment. "But you know what I realized?" Amos said. "My boy was 19. You said you're 23, so 5 years ago you were 18, maybe 17. Just kids. All of you. My David, you, all those German boys in those foxholes. Just kids whose governments sent them to kill each other." He stepped closer to Lucas. "War took my son. I won't let it take anything else. You understand me? We already lost too much. If this man and this girl found something good in all that horror, I'm not going to be the one who destroys it." He turned to the crowd. "Anyone here who's got a problem with Silas's guest can take it up with me. Otherwise, I suggest we all get to church and remember what we're supposed to be doing here. Loving our neighbors, forgiving our enemies. All that stuff Jesus kept going on about." Silence. Then someone in the back started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined. Not everyone. Some people's faces were hard with disapproval. Some turned and walked away. But enough people clapped that the hostility in the air broke. Amos looked at Lucas one more time. "You treat that girl right, you hear me? She waited 5 years for you. Don't make her regret it." "I won't, sir. I promise." "Good. Now let's go inside before Pastor Henderson starts without us." The service was a blur. Lucas sat between Ellie and Silas, aware of eyes on the back of his head, aware of whispers, but also aware of Ellie's hand finding his halfway through the second hymn, of her fingers squeezing his, of the message in that touch, "I'm here, we're here, together." After the service, some people approached, shook Silas's hand, nodded politely at Lucas. Others gave them a wide berth. The town was divided clearly. But it wasn't unanimous rejection. That was something. On the drive home, Silas actually smiled. "Could have been worse," he said. "Could have been better," Ellie countered. "Could have been both," Lucas said. "But we're still here. That's what matters." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday evening when the light was soft and golden across the fields, Lucas asked Ellie to walk with him. They ended up at the South Field, the place where she'd brought him lunch every day 5 years ago, where they'd first started really talking, where everything had begun. Lucas had been working on something in the barn for the past week, carving, the same skill he'd used to make her that wooden horse back in 1945. His hands remembered the work. He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. Simple, plain, no decoration. He'd made it from wood taken from the barn where he'd slept. The same barn where Ellie had given him her address, where she'd told him to write. Inside the box was a ring, not gold, not silver. Lucas couldn't afford those. He'd carved it from the same barn wood, shaped it carefully, polished it smooth. It wouldn't last forever, but it would last long enough. He got down on one knee in the field where everything had started. "Ellie Bergstrom," he said. His voice shook, but his hands were steady. "I have nothing to offer you except promises. I can't give you gold or security or an easy life. I'm still a German in a country that just fought Germany. I'm still trying to figure out who I am. I'm still carrying ghosts." He opened the box. The wooden ring sat inside. "But I can promise to work hard, to be faithful, to love you every day for the rest of my life, to build something with you that the war can't touch. Will you marry me?" Ellie looked at the ring, at him, at the field around them where corn was growing tall and green. Then she laughed, a bright, clear sound like bells. You're asking me this now? After I waited 5 years, after I sold my mother's piano, after I told Emmett Caldwell no in front of the whole town. Lucas's heart stopped. Had he misread everything? Yes, Ellie said. Yes, of course, yes. I've been waiting for you to ask since the moment you stepped off that train. She pulled him to his feet. He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married on June 12, 1950, at St. Olaf Lutheran Church. The wedding was small, 30 people, some of Ellie's friends from town, neighbours who'd decided to accept what they couldn't change. Amos Thornton sat in the front row, his cane propped beside him, tears streaming down his weathered face. Emmett Caldwell didn't come, but he sent a gift, a set of kitchen knives with a note. Take care of her. Pastor Henderson performed the ceremony. The same pastor who'd written one of the letters supporting Lucas's immigration. He spoke about redemption, about love that crosses boundaries, about building new things from the ruins of the old. Ellie wore her mother's wedding dress altered to fit. Simple white lace that had been carefully preserved for 25 years. Lucas wore a suit Silas had bought for him, his first new suit in 6 years. When Pastor Henderson said, "You may kiss the bride," Lucas cupped Ellie's face in his hands and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. Like the 5 years apart had never happened. Like everything they'd survived had led to this exact moment. The local paper ran a photograph the next week. Lucas and Ellie standing on the church steps, squinting in the June sunlight, smiling. The headline read, "Local woman weds former POW, love conquers war." The article told their story. The farm, the letters, the 5 years, the reunion. Some readers sent letters of support. Others wrote angry responses questioning how anyone could marry the enemy. The paper published both sides. But in the farmhouse on the Bergstrom land, Lucas and Ellie didn't read the responses. They were too busy living. Lucas worked the farm like it was his own, because now in a way it was. Silas taught him everything. Crop rotation, equipment maintenance, when to plant, when to harvest, how to read the weather, how to coax life from soil that had fed 3 generations. The physical labor was familiar, good, grounding. Every day Lucas woke before dawn, worked until dark, and fell into bed exhausted. The kind of exhausted that came from building something instead of surviving something. He became an American citizen on March 15, 1955. The ceremony was held in the county courthouse. 20 people taking the oath together. Immigrants from Germany, Poland, Italy, Mexico, all of them raising their right hands, all of them speaking the words in accented English. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. Lucas's voice shook. Ellie sat in the back row holding their 6-month-old son. Their first child, born the previous September. They'd named him Carl after Ellie's brother, after the ghost that had haunted them both. When the ceremony ended, when the judge declared them citizens of the United States of America, Ellie was crying. Happy tears this time. Proud tears. That night, Silas opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for 20 years. The 3 of them sat on the porch, 4 counting baby Carl, and watched the sun set over fields that would someday belong to the child sleeping in Ellie's arms. "You did good, son," Silas said. It was the first time he'd called Lucas that directly. "You did real good." 3 children in total. Carl in 1954, Anna in 1956, Silas Jr. in 1958. Lucas taught them German at the kitchen table. Careful, patient lessons in a language that was part of who he was. Ellie taught them how to plant corn, how to read the sky for rain, how to work without complaining. The children grew up American, completely, thoroughly American. But they knew their father's story, knew where he'd come from, knew what it had cost him to get here. Carl, the oldest, once asked when he was 7 years old, "Papa, do you ever miss Germany?"
Lucas thought about it for a long time. "I miss the mountains," he said finally. "I miss the way the light looked on the peaks in winter. I miss my mother, my brother, the person I was before the war. But you don't want to go back." "No," Lucas said. "This is home. You are home. Your mother is home. That's all that matters." Silas lived long enough to see all 3 grandchildren, long enough to teach Carl how to drive the tractor, long enough to hold Anna while she cried over her first broken heart, long enough to see Silas Jr. take his first steps. He died in his sleep on February 3rd, 1968, 79 years old, peaceful, surrounded by the family he'd built and protected. His last words spoken to Lucas the night before were, "Thank you for making my daughter happy. You're a good man. I'm proud to call you my son." Lucas carried those words with him for the rest of his life, wrote them down in the Bible he'd brought from Germany, underlined them, returned to them whenever doubt crept in. The funeral filled St. Olaf Lutheran to capacity. Silas Bergstrom had lived in Redwood County for 79 years. Everyone knew him, respected him, loved him, or feared him, or both. Lucas gave one of the eulogies. He talked about a man who'd judged people by their character rather than their nationality, who'd given a scared German boy a chance when he had every reason not to, who'd taught him that mercy was stronger than hatred. "Silas saved my life," Lucas said to the congregation. "Not once, but twice. Once when he let me work his farm in 1945, and again when he brought me back in 1950. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to his kindness." Afterward, people came up to shake his hand. Some of them had been at his wedding 18 years earlier. Some had refused to attend, but time had softened things, or maybe they'd just gotten tired of holding grudges. Emmett Caldwell approached during the reception. "Silas was a good man," Emmett said. "The best I ever knew," Lucas agreed. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Emmett extended his hand. "You took good care of her, better than I could have. I'm man enough to admit that." Lucas shook his hand. "Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." The years passed the way years do on a farm. Seasons cycling, crops growing and being harvested, children getting older, going to school, falling in love, leaving home. Carl became a teacher like his uncle had wanted to be. Anna married a boy from the next county and had 4 children of her own. Silas Jr. took over the farm, working the same land his great-grandfather had broken. Lucas and Ellie grew old together. His hair went grey, then white. Hers did the same, though she never cut it short like other women her age. She kept it long braided the way Lucas liked it. They sat on the porch most evenings when the work was done, watched the sun set, held hands without speaking. After 40 years together, they didn't need words for everything anymore. One evening in July 1998, when Lucas was 71 and Ellie was 73, she asked him a question. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" "Regret what?" "This life. Here. With me. You could have stayed in Germany. Rebuilt there. Maybe found someone else. Had an easier time." Lucas looked at her, really looked, at the lines on her face, each one telling a story, at the hands that had worked beside his for decades, at the eyes that still held the same blue intensity he'd first seen in 1945. "I was a prisoner," he said quietly. "You set me free. But I think I freed you too. From the grief. From being Carl's sister forever. We freed each other." "We did," Ellie agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We really did." They sat like that until the stars came out. Lucas died first in January 1999. Heart attack. Quick. He was working in the barn, the same barn where he'd slept 54 years earlier, and his heart simply stopped. Silas Jr. found him an hour later. Called the ambulance even though he knew it was too late. Held his father's hand while they waited. Ellie survived him by 3 months. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but everyone knew better. She'd lost the person who'd made sense of her life. Without him, she just stopped.
They were buried side by side in the cemetery at St. Olaf Lutheran. Their graves are there still. Simple headstones, nothing fancy. Lucas Weber, 1927 to 1999. Beloved husband, father-grandfather. Eleanor Bergstrom. Weber, 1926 to 1999. Beloved wife, mother-grandmother. Between them, at the base of the stones, their children placed a small marker with a quote Ellie had written in one of her letters from 1947. "Love is stronger than war. Hope is stronger than hate. We are proof." The farm still exists. Silas Jr.'s son runs it now. Fourth-generation Bergstrom working the same 300 acres. He's never met his great-grandfather Silas, the one who started it all, but he knows the stories. Every June 12th, on the anniversary of Lucas and Ellie's wedding, the family gathers at the farm. They bring food and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They eat on the same porch where Lucas and Ellie sat for 48 years, and they tell the story. About a German boy who weighed 94 pounds and thought his life was over. About an American girl who'd lost her brother and thought she'd never feel anything again. About how they found each other across an impossible distance. About letters that crossed an ocean. About promises kept against all odds. About how love survived when everything else burned. The children listen wide-eyed. They ask questions. Was it really like that? Did they really wait 5 years? How did they do it? And the old ones who remember who heard it from Lucas and Ellie themselves tell them the truth. Yes, it was really like that. Yes, they really waited. And they did it the same way anyone does anything impossible, one day at a time, one letter at a time, one promise at a time, until the impossible becomes real. Every year on the anniversary, someone, usually the youngest child who can read, stands up and reads from the collection of letters preserved in a box in the attic. 43 letters from Ellie, 43 from Lucas, 86 pieces of paper that bridged an ocean and changed everything. The letters are fragile now. The ink is fading, but the words remain. I think of you every day. Please don't give up. I love you. I'm coming home. Wait for me. I promise. These are the words that saved 2 lives, that built a family, that proved something everyone needs to believe, that hope is real, that love matters, that the future doesn't have to be written by the past. Lucas Weber was a prisoner of war who became a prisoner of love. And in that second captivity, he found freedom. Ellie Bergstrom was a girl drowning in grief who found a reason to surface. And in saving him, she saved herself. They didn't fight a war, they survived one. And in the quiet fields of Minnesota, they built something the war could never touch. This is what endures, not the battles, not the borders, not the propaganda or the hatred or the fear. This. A wooden ring carved from barnwood, 43 letters crossing an ocean, a grandfather who saved a stranger in 1918, a father who returned the favor in 1950, a love that refused to die even when everything else did. On that platform in May 1950, when Lucas stepped off the train and saw Ellie waiting, the war finally ended. Not with surrender or treaties or ceremonies, but with a girl in a blue dress and a boy who'd kept his promise. The rest was just living, just love, just the ordinary miracle of 2 people choosing each other every single day until the days ran out. The Bergstrom farm, 300 acres in Redwood County, Minnesota, where a prisoner became free, where hatred became love, where 2 people proved that even in our darkest moments, even when the world burns, something beautiful can survive. This is their legacy. This is proof. This is love.